The Virginian once taught viewers that the Wild West wasn't just about violence, it was about honor, friendship, and loyalty. But in real life, justice didn't always stand on the side of its cast. Some died just after a lunch break. Some were taken by bizarre accidents that ended both their careers and their lives. And others passed so quietly that not a single newspaper reported it. Can you guess who they were? Join us as we uncover their stories and honor the legacy they left behind. Doug McClure as Trampas. Doug McClure was born on May 11, 1935, in Glendale, California. At 27 years old, he stepped into the Virginian in 1962 and played Trampas, the charming, energetic, mischievous cowboy whose humor and warmth contrasted sharply with the heavy tone of the series. His role became one of the most beloved characters on television westerns, cementing him as a recognizable face of the era. But his personal life was a series of storms he never fully escaped. His 5 marriages, to Faye Brash, Barbara Luna, Helen Crane, Diane Soldani, and finally Diane Fernberg, painted a picture of a man constantly searching for stability he could not hold on to. The divorces drained him emotionally, especially as he struggled to balance fatherhood with an unforgiving schedule. The pressures of fame, the physical demands of writing and stunt work, and the transition from TV westerns to Hollywood films left him anxious and unsettled. Even during the success of the Virginian and The Land That Time Forgot, his private life was collapsing behind the scenes. These emotional fractures fed directly into the habits that slowly destroyed him. Heavy smoking, long nights, and the stress of career instability weakened his body as he aged. By the early 1990s, lung cancer had taken hold, spreading to his liver and bones, yet he continued working, collapsing on the set of One West Waikiki just weeks before his diagnosis was revealed. Sadly, Doug McClure died on February 5, 1995, in Sherman Oaks, California, at just 59 years old, after a rapid, devastating battle with lung cancer. He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $2 million, built from decades of continuous work despite personal turmoil. James Drury as the Virginian. James Drury was born on April 18, 1934, in New York City. At 28 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1962, taking on the role of the calm, stoic, and nameless ranch foreman, known simply as the Virginian. As the central figure of the series, he carried the weight of a 90-minute weekly western on his shoulders for 9 long seasons, becoming the defining face of the show. Yet behind the unbreakable cowboy image was a man quietly torn apart by emotional strain. His first marriage to Crystal Orton, 1957 to 1964, collapsed under the pressure of his relentless filming schedule, leaving him juggling fatherhood and exhaustion. His second marriage to Phyllis Mitchell, 1968 to 1979, suffered the same fate, worn down by the expectations placed upon him after the success of the Virginian. Even as he shined in acclaimed works like Ride the High Country, his personal life unraveled. These fractures eventually took a toll on his health and spirit. Years of constant riding, stunt work, and outdoor shooting left his body tired, while the emotional burden of 2 divorces made him increasingly withdrawn. When he married Carl Ann Head in 1979, she brought him stability, but her passing in 2019 left him devastated once again. The grief weighed heavily on him in his final year, deepening the quiet fatigue that had followed him since the height of his Western fame. Finally, James Drury died from natural causes on April 6, 2020, in Houston, Texas, at age 85. Just 12 days shy of his 86th birthday. His final years were modest, marked by reflection and a net worth of $1.5 million earned through decades of steady work and emotional endurance. Lee J. Cobb as Judge Garth. Lee J. Cobb was born on December 8, 1911, in New York City. At 51 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1962 and played Judge Henry Garth, the stern, principled owner of Shiloh Ranch, whose authority anchored the early seasons of the series. His commanding presence and deep, thunderous voice made him one of the most unforgettable figures in the show's Western landscape. But away from the camera, Cobb's life was shaped by wounds darker than any character he portrayed. His first marriage to Helen Beverly, 1940 to 1952, crumbled under the psychological weight of the Hollywood blacklist, a period in which fear and suspicion consumed his home. Forced before HUAC, Cobb named colleagues to survive, an act that haunted him, strained his relationships, and contributed to Beverly's breakdown. His second marriage to Mary Hirsch, 1957 to 1976, steadied him emotionally, but years of guilt, exhaustion, and the violent rhythm of stage life, especially after originating Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, left him drained and volatile. The stress of carrying both his public career and private shame only worsened his declining health. His heart, already fragile since the 1950s, strained under decades of pressure. Excessive work, chronic regret, and the unending grind between film sets and Broadway rehearsals. Judge Garth appeared dignified and unshakable, but Cobb the man was worn down by the emotional labor of rebuilding a life that had nearly been destroyed by politics and fear. Sadly, Lee J. Cobb died of a heart attack on February 11, 1976, at age 64, in Woodland Hills, California. He was buried at Mount Sinai Memorial Park, a quiet resting place for a man whose life had been anything but quiet. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was $2 million, a testament not to comfort, but to relentless work through some of Hollywood's darkest years. John McIntire as Clay Granger. John McIntire was born on June 27, 1907, in Spokane, Washington. At 60 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1967 and played Clay Granger, the calm, seasoned ranch owner who inherited Shiloh Ranch after his brother's death. His steady presence and gravel-edged warmth made him the anchor of the later seasons. But off-screen, McIntire carried burdens that ran deeper than any Western script. His marriage to Jeanette Nolan, beginning in 1935, was strong and enduring, yet it was marked by profound sorrow. Their son Tim McIntire struggled for years with addiction and declining health, ultimately dying of heart failure in 1986, an event that shattered John and left a permanent sadness in their home. Before that tragedy, McIntire had already lived through decades of professional tension. Replacing Ward Bond in Wagon Train after Bond's sudden death meant inheriting a role under immense pressure, while grueling shooting schedules repeatedly pushed him to exhaustion. By the time he arrived on the Virginian, his body had begun to show the cost of those years. The harsh filming environment, cigarette use, and long hours aggravated his lungs, slowly feeding the emphysema and lung cancer that would one day claim him. And though his work in Wagon Train, Psycho, and dozens of westerns earned him deep respect, sadly, John McIntire died on January 30th, 1991, at age 83, from emphysema and lung cancer in Pasadena, California. He was laid to rest after a life marked by quiet endurance, loyalty to his family, and a sorrow no parent should ever face. At the time of his passing, his estimated net worth was $3 million, earned through decades of steady character work that made him one of the most dependable Western actors of his generation. Clu Gulager as Emmett Riker. Clu Gulager was born on November 16, 1928, in Holdenville, Oklahoma. At 35 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1963 and stepped into the role of Deputy Emmett Riker, the sharp-eyed, quick-draw lawman whose tough resolve and simmering intensity brought a new edge to the series. His presence helped redefine the show's tone during its middle seasons. Behind that steely exterior, however, Gulager carried emotional battles that lasted a lifetime. His marriage to Miriam Byrd Nethery, 1952 to 2003, was long and devoted, But the couple weathered deep hardship when Miriam's health declined, ending in her death from brain cancer. The loss shattered him, leaving a void that clouded his late years. Financial pressure added to the strain. The shift from network westerns to independent films forced him into a cycle of low-budget productions, odd directing jobs, and constant insecurity. Even as he found moments of praise in films like The Tall Man and The Last Picture Show, the instability of the industry left him carrying anxiety that gnawed at him quietly, day after day. The years did not soften his burdens. A severe back injury hindered his mobility, and the exhaustion from decades of non-stop work slowly chipped away at him. He pushed forward, appearing in cult horror films, collaborating with his sons, and even working with Quentin Tarantino in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But the physical decline was unmistakable. Tragically, Clu Gulager died from natural causes on August 5, 2022, in Los Angeles, at 93 years old, after a long life shaped by both creative grit and quiet heartbreak. He spent his final years surrounded by family, especially his son John, at whose home he passed away. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was $10 million, built through decades of acting, directing, and refusing to let age silence him. Roberta Shore as Betsy Garth. Roberta Shore was born on April 7, 1943 in Monterey Park, California. At 19 years old, she joined the Virginian in 1962 and played Betsy Garth, the spirited daughter of Judge Garth, whose warmth and innocence softened the edges of the rugged Western world. Her youthful presence became one of the show's most beloved early elements, elevating her to the status of a teen icon. Yet behind the sweet, confident smile of Hollywood's young star was a girl overwhelmed long before she reached adulthood. Her first marriage to Kent Knowlton Christensen, 1964 to 1974, brought 2 daughters, but also immense strain. The pressure of fame, the clash between career expectations, and her devotion to her LDS faith, and the emotional cost of leaving Hollywood behind at only 22. Her second marriage to Terry C. Barber, 1983 to 1987, added its own grief, ending abruptly when he died, leaving her to navigate loss once again. Though her third marriage to Ron Fredrickson finally brought stability, the pain of earlier years never fully disappeared. The entertainment industry left its marks as well. Starting as a child performer, Roberta grew up under scrutiny, battling the anxiety and emotional fatigue that came with being a teen actress in a world demanding perfection. Walking away from show business, despite roles in The Shaggy Dog, Annette, and Father Knows Best, meant surrendering fame, but it also meant reclaiming peace. Over time, the simple rhythm of family life became her refuge. Today, Roberta Shore is 82 years old. She lives a private, faith-centered life in Utah with her husband Ron Fredrickson, occasionally appearing at small conventions or LDS community events, but mostly enjoying a quieter world far from Hollywood. Her estimated net worth of $3 million comes from her early career, careful personal management, and decades of steady family life that followed her retirement. Gary Clarke as Steve Hill. Gary Clarke was born on August 16, 1933, in Los Angeles, California. At 29 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1962 and played Steve Hill, the charming, easygoing cowboy whose friendship with Trampas helped define the early seasons. His youthful energy and warm humor made him a fan favorite from the moment he appeared on screen. But away from Shiloh Ranch, Clarke's personal life was much harder than it looked. His first marriage to Marilyn L. Knudsen began when he was still a teenager, and within 3 years they had 3 sons, Jeff, Dennis, and David, placing enormous financial pressure on a young man still struggling to build a career. The collapse of that marriage left deep emotional bruises, which carried into his second marriage to actress Pat Woodell. Their divorce added another layer of heartbreak before he finally found stability with Jareen Beatty in 1991. Professionally, being written out of the Virginian after the third season was a devastating blow. The sudden loss of regular income forced Clarke to reinvent himself, turning to screenwriting under his birth name to support his family. Though he found creative satisfaction writing for shows like Get Smart, the transition was not easy. Financial worries, changing expectations, and the feeling of being forgotten by Hollywood pressed on him for years. Now, Gary Clarke is 92 years old. He continues to appear at Western conventions and fan events, often sharing memories of the show that shaped him while living a quiet life with his wife, Jareen. His estimated net worth of $2.5 million reflects a long career built not on fame, but on resilience, reinvention, and the determination to keep moving forward long after Hollywood stopped watching Charles Bickford as John Granger. Charles Bickford was born on January 1, 1891 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. At 75 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1966 and played John Granger, the iron-willed, no-nonsense owner of Shiloh Ranch whose presence brought renewed authority to the series. Though he appeared late in the show's run, his powerful voice and rugged stare made him an instant pillar of the Western drama. Behind that strong exterior, however, Bickford carried a lifetime of emotional scars. His marriage to Beatrice Loring, beginning in 1916, was long and devoted, but the couple endured decades of tension after the infamous 1935 lion attack left Charles disfigured, in chronic pain, and often unpredictable. The trauma reshaped not only his body, but also the atmosphere of his home, turning simple days into battles with fear, exhaustion, and anger that slowly wore down his wife before her death in 1950. And long before Hollywood, he had faced the unimaginable. At only 9 years old, he was tried and acquitted for the attempted murder of a motorman who killed his dog. His career, too, carried its own brand of turmoil. The lion attack dissolved his leading man status and cost him a major studio contract. Years of fighting with executives left him labeled difficult. By the time he transitioned to character roles, earning Oscar nominations for The Song of Bernadette and Johnny Belinda, his health was already weakening. A heart attack in 1965 further eroded his strength, forcing him to push through pain while filming The Virginian. Tragically, Charles Bickford died on November 9, 1967, at age 76, after a long hospitalization caused by pneumonia and a deadly blood infection. At the time of his passing, his estimated net worth was $8 million, earned through 6 decades of relentless work that never truly allowed him peace. Sara Lane as Elizabeth Granger. Sara Lane was born on March 12, 1949, in New York City. At 17 years old, she joined the Virginian in 1966 and played Elizabeth Granger, the gentle, bright-eyed young lady of Shiloh Ranch whose innocence softened the rough edges of the western frontier. Her natural ease around horses and quiet charm made her one of the final memorable additions to the long-running series. Yet behind her graceful appearance, Sara's personal life carried its own weight of strain. Her marriage to John Scott was strong, but their journey was far from simple. They built a winery together, a dream that demanded money, labor, and an emotional investment far heavier than Hollywood ever showed. Leaving show business after the Virginian was not a glamorous transition, it was a sacrifice. While her friends chased fame, Sara faced moments of doubt, financial uncertainty, and the reality of raising children while learning an entirely new industry with her husband. Those pressures tested their marriage, forcing them to balance love with survival. The years that followed brought both pride and heartbreak. The Havens Winery found success, but fame quietly slipped away, leaving Sara with a sense of unfinished identity. An actress who walked away at her peak, unsure if the world would remember her name. And then illness struck. Her 6-year battle with breast cancer exhausted her strength, strained her family, and forced her husband and children into the cruel role of caretakers. Sadly, Sara Lane died on March 3, 2023, at home in Napa, California, just 9 days shy of her 74th birthday. She was 73 years old, surrounded by the family she fought so hard to protect. Her estimated net worth of $1 million reflected a life lived humbly but bravely. Dawn Quine as Stacy Granger. Dawn Quine was born on September 11, 1938, in Fenville, Michigan. At 28 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1966 and played Stacy Granger, the restless, determined young ranch hand whose temper and ambition added a new fire to Shiloh Ranch. His arrival brought youth, conflict, and emotional depth to the later seasons of the show. But behind that confident presence was a man often worn down by the very life he had chosen. His marriage to Judy Balaban began in 1971, tying him to a world of higher expectations and social circles he never fully felt comfortable in. Although the union lasted 25 years, the pressure of constant schedules, long filming days, and later the unpredictable demands of the sports promotion world slowly eroded the tenderness between them. The cracks widened as Dawn shifted careers, from acting to writing books to promoting the Professional Karate Association. Even after the divorce in 1996, the exhaustion of those years left a lasting mark. Professionally, Dawn struggled to find his footing once he left Hollywood's spotlight. While Peyton Place and the Virginian gave him national recognition, the roles dried up quickly. Reinventing himself as an author and sports promoter brought a sense of pride. Living in Las Cruces, New Mexico, he poured his energy into writing novels and self-defense books, trying to rebuild purpose after decades of career turbulence. Now Dawn Quine is 87 years old. He lives a peaceful but modest life dedicated to writing, far removed from the chaos of his Hollywood years. With an estimated net worth of $1 million, his legacy rests not in fame but in perseverance. Randy Boone as Randy Benton. Randy Boone was born on January 17, 1942, in Fayetteville, North Carolina. At 21 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1963 and played Randy Benton, the guitar-strumming, warm-hearted ranch hand whose songs became a signature sound of the show's early years. His youthful charm and easy musical talent made him a beloved figure among fans of the Western. But in private, Boone's life was tangled in the struggle of balancing two identities, actor and musician. His early marriages, to Sylvia Eloise Howell, 1966 to 1969, and later Patricia M. Hunt, 1970 to 1973, were marked by long separations, the instability of touring, and the relentless financial pressure of inconsistent acting jobs. The constant back and forth between film sets and small music venues created exhaustion that seeped into both marriages. By the time he married Lana Marie Sykes in 2009, Randy carried decades of emotional bruises, failed unions, a strained relationship with time, and the lingering question of whether he had ever fully belonged to Hollywood. His professional path was equally turbulent. After leaving the Virginian, Boone found himself drifting through short-lived shows like Cimarron Strip, unable to recapture the momentum he once had. Acting roles dwindled, music gigs paid less, and financial strain haunted him through middle age. Even as a country singer with a loyal following, he often faced the painful reality of an artist who had peaked too early. Tragically, Randy Boone died on August 28, 2025, at the age of 83, with the cause of death undisclosed. His passing closed the final chapter of a life spent wandering between screens, stages, and wide-open roads. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was $3 million, earned through a lifetime of modest but heartfelt work. Jeanette Nolan as Holly Granger. Jeanette Nolan was born on December 30, 1911, in Los Angeles, California. At 56 years old, she joined the Virginian in 1967 and played Holly Granger, the stern yet loving matriarch who brought steadiness to Shiloh Ranch alongside her real-life husband, John McIntire. Her powerful voice, sharp instincts, and decades of acting experience made her one of the series' most commanding presences. But Jeanette's private life held a depth of sorrow that no script could soften. Her marriage to John McIntire, though enduring from 1935 until his death in 1991, was marked by the deep grief of losing one of their children at a young age. Balancing motherhood with a career spanning radio, film, and television pushed her into constant motion, and the pressure eventually took a toll. More than 1,000 voice-acting roles meant endless hours in studios, long nights rehearsing, and the emotional strain of always being on. Even with a devoted partner by her side, the combination of personal loss and professional demands often pressed heavily on her heart. Her body also paid the price for her relentless work. From her early radio days to her later television roles, the non-stop schedule left her fatigued and vulnerable to illness. Decades of pushing herself through grief, deadlines, and expectations culminated in the stroke that ultimately claimed her life. And yet, in the midst of heartbreak and physical decline, she delivered some of her finest performances: The Big Heat, Psycho's chilling vocal work, and her Emmy-nominated television roles. Sadly, Jeanette Nolan died on June 5, 1998, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Los Angeles, at the age of 86, following complications from a stroke. She was buried in Tobacco Valley Cemetery in Eureka, Montana, beside the husband she had loved through triumph and tragedy. Her estimated net worth of $2 million reflected a lifetime spent working with unwavering resolve. L.Q. Jones as Belden. L.Q. Jones was born on August 19, 1927, in Beaumont, Texas. At 36 years old, he joined the Virginian in 1963 and played Andy Belden, the loyal, rugged ranch hand whose dry humor and quiet resilience made him one of the show's most consistent supporting characters. But the calm exterior he showed on screen contrasted sharply with the emotional fractures in his personal life. His marriage to Netta Sue Lewis, beginning in 1950, endured nearly 3 decades of strain. The long days on television sets, constant travel, and the frustration of being typecast in supporting roles gradually wore down the marriage. For Jones, each small role felt like a reminder of opportunities slipping through his fingers, and the resentment that built over time seeped into his home life. The divorce in 1979 left him broken-hearted, carrying the quiet guilt of a man who knew that ambition and exhaustion had slowly eroded his family. His career outside the Virginian was no less chaotic. Jones won admiration for The Wild Bunch and Casino, yet he remained a character actor fighting for space in an industry that rarely made room for men like him. His greatest passion project, the cult film A Boy and His Dog, 1975, became both his triumph and torment. With limited budget, constant setbacks, and the pressure of writing, producing, and directing, he often struggled under the weight of the film's demands. Sadly, L.Q. Jones died on July 9, 2022, at his home in Hollywood Hills, California, from natural causes, at the age of 94. He left behind a legacy built on perseverance rather than stardom. His estimated net worth of $2 million reflected a long career carved through hard work, personal sacrifice, and the resilience of a man who kept standing even when life pushed him to the margins. Now that you've seen the hidden tragedies behind the Virginian, which story shocked you the most? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold Hollywood stories.